Okay, we're unmuted.
Okay, it is 5 o'clock, so I will go ahead and start. Work sessions are an opportunity for board members to discuss issues informally with staff and invited guests. The board encourages members of the public to attend work sessions and listen to the discussion, but there is generally no opportunity for public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the board are welcome to do so during the board's regularly scheduled meetings. It looks like up first is topic number 1, legislative update.
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Whitley Sullivan with PAC West. And I do believe that Phil Shoyers is going to be jumping on. But for the time being, I can kind of go through some of the housing portion, which is my expertise. So we have 3 priority concepts that two that I've been really focusing on. One is expanding building code to provide residents safety in RVs. I know that there's been a lot of RV issues in the county. Some of the opportunities that we're seeing moving forward are going to be a little bit difficult, I think, to maybe get done this session. We brought on Mark Long, who used to be the building codes director for over 20 years, and he's really valuable to our team. So I'm excited to have him. Some of the solutions that he thought would be best would be to have a partnership with DLCD and building codes to maybe inspect RVs. The issue is that RVs in Oregon aren't supposed to be used as primary residences. And so we're coming into kind of a no man's land of how to regulate them for safety. We could look on working within the city limits on updating local codes. There are several bills this session that are dealing with RVs as primary residences. So those are opportunities for us to look into maybe adding some safety features that I can talk about a little bit later. Maybe grant programs for updating efficiency standards or no interest loan replacement programs. Or we could also work through building codes and adopting a nuisance enforcement program for Clatsop County. All of those are just opportunities to try to address this very significant issue that is not just in Clatsop County. We were speaking with Leader Fahey. She has some of the most populated RVs parks in her district, and she has the exact same issues. What we're up against is that a lot of the representatives and legislators don't have any desire to do anything that would limit people's access to housing, even if it's for their safety. So moving on, we also we're looking at support for adequate funding for rural social service infrastructure. We have a lot that we can talk about here. House Bill 5019 is the omnibus housing and homeless financial package that's moving in coordination with House Bill 2001. Here we have around $26 million that are going to different types of social service programs across the state. And then there are several other bills that are dictating specifically rural funds. So we have 1.25 million going to OHCS for a continuum of care to address homelessness. We have 5 million going to an emergency fund to assist school-age children who are at risk of becoming homeless. And I have 12.5 for DHS to go to shelters. And I'm not quite sure if we have maybe the opportunity to look at every single funding package, but I can absolutely send the board kind of what I have determined. Moving to more rural specific, there's Senate Bill 332, which is just a study to look at behavioral health treatment in rural and medically underserved areas of the state. I think we have an opportunity here to really value, to input Clatsop County's issues. And then we have Senate Bill 390, which requires OHA to study mental health treatment in rural areas. We also have a lot of tax credits that are rural specific. One of them that I wanted to highlight was House Bill 2623, which is a tax credit for childcare workers. I know that where I'm from in Northeastern Oregon, which is the exact same, it's across the state, there's a huge childcare desert. And so there are a lot of tax credits, which we'll be seeing in tax expenditures later this session, that are specifically detailed for providing or expanding like healthcare tax credits for nurse practitioners, for lab scientists, for psychiatrists in rural settings. And Phil, I think you've jumped on, so I just started going through the rural and social service priority, but I didn't know if you wanted to kind of go through the PowerPoint that we had.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I apologize, board, for not being able to be on the video. I tried, for some reason, the desktop version keeps buffering, so I just joined via phone, and I apologize about that. I think in our past meeting, we talked about broadband being part of our rural services. We have met since our last meeting with a member of Business Oregon to check in on where they're moving forward. The last update we provided with you was that they were moving forward with looking at a broadband office expansion within their budget. They are still doing that, but they have paused that a little bit. And I don't know, Whitley, if you've already mentioned, it seems like the legislature has basically paused a lot of the conversations and focus since our last meeting to now of trying to get forestry and housing issues moving forward in the legislative process. And then they will go and tackle the next two issues. Part of that is, I think, because both caucuses and both chambers have agreed that those are top issues for them, and that's maybe the easier things to move forward currently. And I apologize again, Whitley, you might have already tackled housing, and I didn't hear. I apologize. But
No,
broadband has. Oh, perfect. Okay, that will be
Whitley,
next.
So, Philip, can you hear me?
Oh yes,
Hey,
I apologize.
I know that Commissioner Thompson has a couple questions, so I'm going to go ahead and
Okay.
let Commissioner Thompson ask those.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Glad you're here. So I had a very interesting conversation. I haven't had a chance to update you, Chair Queel, with the Warrenton School Superintendent today. He gave me a heartbreaking tale about the status of homeless youth at the Warrenton population. So what he told me was they not only need housing, they need mental health care services. And I see all of these bills that are referenced. What I couldn't tell Superintendent Rogozinski was, how does he access that money? I referred him to our state senator and state representative, but I hope that you will be able to help us have better information on where we can point people to get them involved in that. And as far as broadband goes, I've got a memo from Michael Burdick that I'm going to give to the Assistant County Manager to pass on about AOC's position on broadband, just because it makes sense to me, and then we can talk about it as a board. But broadband, juvenile mental health services, which our public affairs officer sent us an extremely valuable article today about the deplorable situation on the underfunding since at least 2008 of adolescent mental health care. So it's a long-term issue. It's critical now that we address it in your district, in our districts all over Clatsop County. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Do we have any other questions at this juncture? Okay, we'll turn it back over to you, Philip and Whitley.
No problem. And I would just build a little bit off of that, Commissioner. That is a conversation they're having, in the sense of they merged two committees from the last session to this one and want to have a better focus on behavioral health and those type of services that fall under mental health and behavioral health. I just don't think they've gotten there in the conversation. I know that they've talked to K-12 education. I know some of the boards that Governor Kotek are pulling together on the topic include education advocates. And I think also members from her the governor's Quality Education Commission. I apologize if I'm butchering that name. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But they have superintendents on there. That is something they are talking about. I just haven't seen how this is all going to come together in the end, because it's such a big need. It's a focus, but it's such a big need. I think they're trying to take bites of the apple at the time and see, how do you align? And to be frank, I think they're looking a little bit about, how do you make this a coordinated effort? You can't just do one service and call it good, because if you just did this one, there's other aspects of somebody's life or situations that affect them. And so they're kind of taking maybe what they did when they looked at coordinated care organizations. How do you wrap services around a person to make sure that, well, today we're helping with this service, but that doesn't mean I guess maybe a better way to phrase it is it's hard to help address one issue if they don't have a roof over their head or they are wondering where the next meal is coming. And so they're trying to have that conversation all in one room, but it's so big and the need is so great. I think they're just trying to get there. So I know what's happening, Commissioner. I just don't think we're there yet to maybe have a specific answer for you, but we are following it. I hope that's helpful.
And I would like
Thanks,
to
Philip. I
add,
think
Phil,
Commissioner Thompson has a follow-up.
I do have a follow-up question. You're right. Well, yeah, that interesting phrase, coordinated care organization. You may or may not be aware that Clatsop County Board of Commissioners has neither voice nor vote on our local coordinated care organization. And that's been a sore point with all of us. The organization has a contract with the Oregon Health Authority and has to date been unresponsive in addressing our concerns. So just in case you're dealing with coordinated care organizations, know that I think we as a body have some agreement. We haven't taken a formal vote, but I think we have informal agreement that we should have voice and vote on our local coordinated care organization, because we took an oath of office to be the mental health board in Clatsop County. We can't do it if they won't let us on that board. Thank you.
I totally agree. And if it's not the commissioner, it should be our public health director or someone from the county that has representation on that.
I prefer commissioner. I prefer commissioner because we are in fact accountable to the voters directly. That puts us on the cutting edge of accountability, and that's where I think we want to be. That's what we signed on to do. So if I could respectfully true us back up to commission.
Perfect. And Chair and Commissioner, my apologies if I alluded that it's going to go through a CCO. What I was trying to say is I think that when the conversation was going on about creating CCOs and the importance of coordinating care around and wraparound service around an individual, that's the same tone that they're having about this. I don't know if they're planning to send it through a CCO. It's just it's the same conversation of wrapping services around an individual. And that was the conversation they had when they were creating CCOs. And I believe that was like 2009, around that time. So my apologies if I alluded to being wrong on that.
I would also like to add, just in the terms of mental health, there is in this omnibus housing financial package, $12.5 million to DHS to address kind of the specific social services like mental health and substance abuse for homeless youth, which I know doesn't get to the crux of every youth who needs mental health services, but it's probably going to get to the population that needs the most help. Homelessness is kind of one of the big topics this session. And so a lot of the money is being appropriated specifically for those causes. I don't know if we want to continue going on and talking about kind of maybe the full omnibus housing package, which is what I've spent a lot of my time on. Phil, unless you have something else you wanted to add.
No, I think housing is probably a big topic that has happened from the last meeting to this one. So if the board's good with that, maybe we could tackle that next.
Okay, so House Bill 2001 is a combination of a lot of bills that we saw earlier this session into one massive 136-page document. The first 41 sections are the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, and this is actually probably the most contentious for local government. We heard when it moved out of House Housing last week, a lot of mayors and commissioners speak out against it, specifically because it has some housing accountability requirements and measures that are pretty not helpful for these local governments. I think everyone's approaching the fact of housing and trying to produce as much housing as possible I don't think there's any local government that is against housing. And so this bill puts some measures like Oregon Housing Community Services could retract grants that communities have received if they're not producing the housing that they are trying to produce. And so the mayor of Eugene was adamant about how unfortunate she thought that this housing package has been. League of Oregon Cities has taken a non-stance on it because some cities like it, some don't. But essentially what it does is that DAS will annually conduct a statewide housing analysis. And this analysis is required for every city that is over 10,000 in population. For Clatsop, that's only going to be Astoria, I believe. The first 13 sections kind of talk about what that housing analysis will look like. And then it goes into the part of when these communities don't meet their housing goals, that the state is going to step in and kind of create these production timelines, which is not, again, very flexible for local governments to have control. Sections 20 through 34 go into urbanization requirements. And then 35 through 41 are the housing report specifics and population forecasts. It's all fairly dense, but I think it's going to be really important for us to stay on top of what that stick is going to look like at the end of it. We approach local government needs to have as much flexibility as possible and local control. And this housing needs analysis doesn't necessarily produce that type of process. So we are keeping very diligent eyes on it. At this point, it is going to be heard in Joint Ways and Means on Friday and then move over to the Senate side. I believe we're trying to get some edits on it, but this is Governor Kotek's 60-day. This is her bill. She spoke out on it. And the leadership in the legislature has a lot of incentive to get this through to the finish line. I don't know if there's any questions on that front.
Yeah, Commissioner Webb has a question.
More of a comment. I'm a little tired of legislative mandates for doing housing assessments. A couple of years ago, Eco Northwest did a, I think it was maybe 4 years ago. It was probably after the last, maybe it was 3 years ago, after the last large session. And they did regional analyses across the state. I think as a former member of the Housing Authority here, we have been pretty consistent in telling Salem what we need to build more housing. I'm just real tired of assessments. For 40 years, DLCD has required that everybody who does a comp plan does a 20-year needs for housing. We know that we need more housing, and we know pretty well how many units we need and in what housing stratas of value. And we've been telling Salem precisely what we need. We need it's a list of things that I don't know why there's so many questions being asked about what we need, because I think it's pretty clear what we need. To go into another assessment phase makes me a little bit crazy. So I hope we can get past that and not worry too much. I hope that we can be advocates for, we pretty much know what we need. And we just need what we need is money. We need different kinds of money. And in our areas, we need infrastructure. And so to me, it's not, I'm very sad that this conversation that I've been following closely, especially in the House, I'm very sad that cities have come forward with some kind of problems with being mandated. We've mandated housing supply in this state for 40 years. We just haven't been building it. We just haven't been completing it because we haven't had the money. If you ever have an opportunity to tell anybody that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. And it's the pockets for what we need infrastructure wise in this state are just not big enough. There's a small 1.5 million to help with rural system development charges, right? Like that is something we've heard across the board of system development charges being a hindrance to developers. But those are also really important to local government. And so there's this balance of who's going to be paying for things. Hopefully we'll see a lot of that cross the finish line and allocating grants for these cities to be able to, encourage housing production versus being a hindrance towards it. But I'm going to keep moving on unless there's any more comments or questions.
I think Commissioner Thompson has a question, and we do have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, I'll be quick on this. I understand that Salem can mandate that we will have certain quotas to meet. What I'm familiar with the construction industry is if there's this flood of needs all over Oregon, how do we assure that there's a workforce adequate to produce the mandated quotas? And why should we be penalized if workforce isn't available?
That's an excellent comment, Commissioner. We've had a couple of housing developments, I believe in Southern Oregon, that actually they were able to frame the entire development, but they couldn't get electrical workers in it to do the rest of the job. And so they were just, at that point, they literally thought, okay, we're going to take all this up and put in manufactured homes because at least they're going to have the electrical in them. It's a very, very serious concern that we have. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So the next kind of bit of this omnibus housing package is all about youth homelessness and homelessness in a broader sense. It does a lot. It creates the emergency housing account, which is funded then through 5019, House Bill 5019. It awards grants to different organizations that provide evidence-based services, and then expands the use of grant monies for eligible host homes for youth and experiencing homelessness. Moving down, we have 46 or sections 46 through 53. Now, these are the modular and pre-development funds. You end up putting 20 million towards a modular grant to help. Basically, I think there's a couple of struggling businesses in the state who need some help. So this is going to go to them to produce the homes that we want. And then there's 3 million to go into loans for pre-development costs for projects marketed towards middle income Oregonians. The next section of this omnibus bill is about eviction process changes. It changes the process and the timelines for evicting for non-payment. It extends notification timelines for landlords from 3 days to 12 days or 15 days, depending on what the situation is. And then it also seals eviction records after 1 year if the person who experienced the eviction meets a bunch of criteria. And then the last section of the omnibus housing bill is the ag workforce housing grants. And this gives $5 million to the State Department of Ag to provide workforce housing for ag workers and families. Currently, previously House Bill 2001 was pretty Democratic. The Democratic caucus had really driven it. This last section was the compromise with the Republican caucus. And I kind of mentioned briefly the House Bill 3268. That's the 1.5 million for rural system development charges. That's going to have a public hearing tomorrow in House Housing. So I'm going to be curious to see how that goes. We also have House Bill 3138, which is $30 million for it's a grant for Regional Rural Revitalization Strategies Consortium. You can say that 5 times fast if you want to. But it's all for communities under 50,000. And that passed committee and is currently in Joint Ways and Means. And the last bill that I wanted to highlight was Senate Bill 1013, which requires counties to allow certain rural homeowners to cite 1 recreational vehicle on their property with some sort of safety and appearance modes. So that's kind of one of the bills that I thought if we wanted to, we could look into amending to include maybe some provisions for current RV parks, but I think that might be a heavy lift. And that hearing was held earlier this week. So that's what I have on housing. I'd love to hear if there's any other questions or comments or things you personally want me to make sure that I keep a close eye on.
Yeah, thank you, Willie. Any questions at this time?
No.
Oh, didn't look like it.
Okay.
And Chair, I guess if it's okay, just to wrap up, I know we're close. I just want to give an update on a couple other topics that I know are important to the commissioners, just to see where we are in status of time. Is that okay? Or
That would be great. Yeah, we got
All
5
right.
minutes.
perfect. All right. The first one is going from our last meeting to this meeting. We have tried to outreach on multiple times. We've had a few successful meetings on the priority bill that we're trying to run for the fees that the county is being assessed over at, I think it's Riverhawk. We have been visiting with LC, which is Legislative Council, and drafting an amendment to our bill. We have had that meeting with county staff. They are working on that. This was a big deadline week, so we were pushed a little bit behind all of the other bills because we were fortunate enough to get that bill in the House Revenue Committee, which is not subject to timelines. So they are doing the amendments for bills that are subject to the first chamber deadline that's coming up here in the next week or so. And so we are waiting to get back the language that fits the county's goal in this bill. And so when we have that, we're going to be sharing that with your staff, making sure that that's what the county wants and that we can then have a public hearing scheduled. They went ahead and did schedule that public hearing originally, but there was a error in the drafting of the bill. It was not what we wanted when it came back to us. So we visited with the chair. They pulled that bill. We also visited with Greg Smith, who's the sponsor of the bill. They both were good with us working with LC directly. They gave us and the staff a mother's note is what they call it. So they could just work directly with us to get the language right. When we get that back, we'll be sharing it with your staff, and then they will reschedule the public hearing. So I wanted to just update you on that. The other one was the importance, and I know Commissioner Thompson, after our last meeting, we have not had any progress on our conversations around ODOT funding. That is because when we continued pushing that after the last meeting, that's where we got the direction of, hey, we have to get housing out the door. We have to get forestry going forward. And they had to get the rebalance bill going forward. I anticipate March is the time where that conversation's coming back up. And I will be looping you into that. I promise you that. But there's been no movement on it because of those three priorities getting out the door this month. And so that is an update. We just have nothing more from that conversation. The only thing that moved on it was it's likely that funding will end up in a capital construction or ending fund, the ending fund bill. So it's capital construction and bonding bills. They introduced the bills just last Friday in Capital Construction Committee. That the language you see in those bills, they introduce it as what was passed the session previous. They will not amend that bill until the very end of session. The amendment will be what we call a gut and stuff. All the current language you read in that are projects that were funded last biennium. That amendment will remove it all and put the new funding projects in there. And so conversation has not moved forward on that between the last meeting with we had with you folks and this one. We anticipate it happening in March and then the amendment coming in June. So Commissioner Thompson, I promised you that I would do that. We just have not had any follow-up because of leadership has said those three priorities they wanted. So, and then I think the forestry update I wanted to give, I don't have, but Commissioner Bangs, I don't know. I know you've been talking with Rick Metzger, who was not able to make tonight's meeting. I don't know if it's appropriate. We can put that update in writing once I get that from him. We've just been running this week, coming up to a chamber deadline. And I don't know if you want to update conversations on that. I know the hearing was last week, or if you just want us to make sure that all the commission gets that in writing from Rick. I'm good either way. I will follow your direction.
So Phil, I think we're having a little bit of hard time hearing what you said in regards to your forestry update. a little bit on all of it, but I know that you're asking Commissioner Bangs to provide you with some feedback.
Yeah, and I apologize. I don't know why I'm connected to my Wi-Fi at my house. I'm just having struggles tonight. I apologize if that's breaking up on you. What I was saying was Rick Metzger in our office is taking the lead on forestry issues. I know he's connecting with Commissioner Bangs. I just don't have his update because he wasn't able to make tonight's meeting. I can either option one, get him to put that in writing and get it to each of the board members, or I don't know. I was going to turn to either the chair or Commissioner Bangs to see if you wanted to relay that update. Either way.
Phil, if you want to go ahead and email that to Amanda and myself, and then we can follow up with the board.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
If we can read his lips, it would really be easier. No, thank you, Phil, and thank you, Whitley. We appreciate the update. Do
Sorry.
you have any other questions at this time?
Thank you for all the good work.
Yeah, thank you for all your work. And thank you for being an advocate for us.
And thank Amanda, because her report.
Well, I will speak on behalf of Phil. Thank you all for the opportunity tonight, and we will touch base very shortly.
Sounds great. All right.
And Chair, I can follow up too in regards to the bill regarding Fishhawk Lake. That's around homeowners association
Gotcha.
fees.
Okay.
And so,
I know that we were, yep, that was what that bill was, at the Fishhawk Lake. Yeah, yeah, we were having a little trouble understanding.
yeah, I could tell, so I just wanted to follow up with that. I felt like I was in a Peanuts episode.
Exactly. If they could,
Thank you, Amanda.
if we could work on the quality of that sound, that'd be good.
Okay, we'll move on to the Law Duck amendments, parking standards update. Gail Henriksen, our Community Development Director, is here, and this is on page 24 of our agenda. We have 15 minutes set aside for this.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Again, for the record, I'm Gail Henriksen. I'm here with Jason Pollock, who is one of our planners. And even though I'm going to do most of the talking this evening, Jason is the one who did all the work. And this is his first project where he's actually worked on code amendments. So we wanted to kind of ease him into the board process. So thank you. And we are both here tonight to answer questions.
That was mean of you to pick parking to do that.
So over the past couple of years, staff initiated some changes to the parking amendments, and our parking standards are, by many different variables, really out of whack. And so Jason spent a lot of time earlier this last year and this year going through the Institute for Transportation Engineers Parking Manual, which is kind of the gold standard for best practices for how you should calculate your parking. The example that we like to use is a few years ago, Napa Pizza came in to reopen the restaurant out there. They are a restaurant that has 72 seats. The code at that time and now would still require them to have 96 parking spaces, which is incredibly high by any standard in any jurisdiction I've ever worked in. So with the changes that we are proposing here, not just for restaurants, but several other different types of uses and businesses, the parking ratios would go down. So if Napa Pizza were to come in after this legislation is adopted, their parking would have gone from 96 spaces to 32 spaces, plus some parking for their employees. So when Jason worked on this, he did not only look at the ITE manual, but he also looked at all of the surrounding jurisdictions within the county and our neighboring counties and some counties further inland. I think you looked at Deschutes and cities over in that area as well, just to see what they're doing. And so what we've put together, or what Jason has put together, is really a complete overhaul of our parking code to reduce a lot of parking standards, to add in uses that 10 years ago or even 40 years ago when parking was initially addressed didn't even exist. Also to update our definitions and just generally bring this up into the 21st century and a reality-based parking code requirement. So Jason took this to the Planning Commission back in February of last of last year, February last month. And got some feedback from them, which is talked about on page 25 of your agenda package. And really tonight we're here just to get your initial feedback and any direction you may have. And then from here we would make changes, bring it back to the Planning Commission in April for a public hearing, and then it would come back in May before your board for two additional public hearings. And Jason and I are really here to answer questions this evening.
Great. Any questions? Commissioner Thompson and then Commissioner Banks.
Commissioner Banks was first.
Banks, you're first.
I just want to say that, having heard about Napa Pizza's experience very vocally when that was occurring, I like reality. I like the direction that we're headed with this. I do have a curiosity, though, that can businesses circle back and reduce parking after the fact, after we go through this process and update our law? Would they be able to circle back and say 36 spots and then reopen their outdoor space?
Yeah, they could certainly come back once the ordinance is passed if they have a use for it, if they want to do outdoor dining or, you know, an expansion to the restaurant or something.
Okay.
Then we would look at recalculate their parking at that time.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson?
Okay, a little levity here. My ancient history professor, Madeline Huzar, was noted for her rigorous examinations, and she got this twisted little smile and said, yeah, this is to separate the sheep from the goats. You've separated the sheep from the goats in this. It's really admirable work. I wonder if you've heard any public comment. I don't have a pizza place in my
Amazing pizza.
yeah, well, good, unsolicited testimonial. Have you had public input? Because I haven't received any.
We haven't, sorry.
That's okay. So what we have done, we haven't held a public hearing per se. We did take it to the Planning Commission as a work session item last month, so they held their initial discussion. We did not have any public at that meeting. Nobody showed up for it to speak or to even listen. All of the parking requirements, though, we have not raised any parking standards. Everything has been lowered. We do have some new standards. For example, a coffee kiosk would have 2 parking spaces, which may sound very odd, but under the code, when you have required parking, you have to have at least 1 handicap or ADA accessible parking space. If you only have 1 space and it has to be ADA accessible, there would be no place for a non-ADA accessible employee to park. So we did some tweaks like that, but everything else is a reduction in the required parking. We will have published ads before this goes back to the Planning Commission. We're not required to do a mailed notice because we're not changing zoning anywhere. So, and we are not taking away anybody's ability to do anything. So there is not a required public notice that will be sent out. It will just be advertisements for the Planning Commission meeting, advertisements in the paper, and our agenda posted on the county's website.
Follow-up question, if I may? Curveball. I've been dealing with the transportation alternatives people who are very interested in inciting the cooperation of businesses to add charging stations in their parking lots. I don't know if there's any way to sweeten anything. I don't think it belongs in code, particularly at this point. But I don't know if there's a way to add a benefit or an offset of some kind or some way of encouraging the installation of charging stations for electric vehicles. And I don't know if you even want to go there. So it's fine with me if you say, Commissioner, that's a lovely idea. We're not ready yet. That's a fine answer.
Well, actually, it's going to be more your board's direction than anything that I would direct. I think that there have been some changes in the building code that will require charging stations for certain types of development. We don't see that much commercial development in unincorporated counties, so our requirement for electric vehicle charging is going to be pretty minimal. If you wanted to, and we have not addressed it in this set of amendments, but if your board was interested in something like that, then we could draft parking reduction. So if you install 2 electric vehicle charging stations, maybe you reduce your other parking by 2, like that. So you're not actually having to put in extra spaces, or maybe you get an extra 2 on top of that or something like that. But we have not looked at it and addressed it, not for any particular reason. We're focused on the actual parking calculations.
Go ahead, kind of follow on that point. Yeah, kind of follow up on that a little bit, and I would be, I guess, the one individual against any kind of mandates or any kind of regulations on parking, EV stations, just as a matter of experience. There's a lot of the municipalities don't have the infrastructure to support that. And if you're going to put the demand for that on the businesses, now you overstress that business, and it may not have a benefit to them. It's a personal choice to drive an EV, so it's not a mandate. So making a business pay that extraordinary amount, a simple EV station could be $100,000 just for the machine, not accounting for the installation. That's a huge commitment, financial commitment for any business. And if they require more than one, I could put a business out of business, or, a potential project is no longer viable. So I'd like to keep us, as a body, to keep that out of the equation until we get further down the road. I just don't see it as something that we need to get into. We're not mandated to drive EVs, and until the country has that infrastructure, I don't think we should give our constituents.
Hence my use of the word encourage.
Yeah. As would even encourage. I wouldn't personally, and I'm doing it, we're doing it, but I would not encourage it. Anyone who doesn't absolutely need it.
Thank you. Commissioner Banks?
Yeah.
No, I'm right in line with your comment in regards to not wanting to add more requirements to our constituents for anything that involves growing a business or economics, because it just continually makes their burden of startup even more difficult. But I was looking at this, and I've noticed some reductions for like child care centers, which is amazing, or no, family child care homes, which is amazing. I'm glad to see alleviating requirements in situations such as that. Are there any other noted alleviations in regards to any other in-home businesses or businesses that would be in the unincorporated that are not the traditional restaurant, convenience store, gas station type situation?
Yeah, I think there was one other. I think it was actually for either accessory dwelling units. We have looked at eliminating the additional parking requirement for those. Home businesses are often addressed on a case-by-case basis, and usually if it's a small home occupation, it's people who are already living in the house, so there's no additional requirements for that. If it would be something that would bring in visitors, for example, we had a skydiving school that brought in 6 to 10, well, I'll say 6 people per class. So they did have some additional parking requirements because they would have an impact on their neighborhood.
Okay, excellent. I'm glad it's case by case, because I think of our seamstresses, I think of our child care providers, I think of, a lot of stuff that occurs in unincorporated Clatsop County that I wouldn't want to add a burden to. So thank you.
Commissioner Webb?
Yeah, I have a question, because I can't remember my reading of this or in the ADU section, that there was a suggestion to eliminate a parking space requirement for an ADU. I can't imagine doing that. I mean, because especially in rural areas where parking on the street is sometimes really far away from where the ADU is. What's the thinking behind that?
So the thinking behind that, Commissioner Webb, is that with the 2 bills that were passed that would allow the ADUs on the rural lands, each requires a minimum 2-acre lot size. So there should be adequate parking available, whether you mandate that there's 2 for the additional ADU plus the 2 for the house on a 2-acre parcel. there should be no reason why you wouldn't have adequate parking space available, and nobody would be required to park on the street. The other rationale behind that is that as we are trying to encourage housing and trying to eliminate as many barriers that we have control over. Obviously, some things we don't have control over, but some things we do. And so the things that we do have that ability to change, staff is proposing that. And it's certainly a policy decision by your board if you wanted to go that route and eliminate parking, or if you still want to have a parking requirement for accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, I really, it's one of those things, I mean, I understand your logic that if you're in that big a space, there's going to be someplace you can park your car. But it seems to me also that if you're renting out an ADU, for instance, that having a place that you can park safely and, you know, that isn't going to be, or, you know, there's isn't going to be planting or there's going to be drainage. So I guess I just didn't feel that having one parking place per ADU would be that burdensome. I just would assume it would be something that anybody who was going to rent out an ADU would do. And so requiring it,
We've got an executive session, so we want to try to wrap this up. Commissioner Baines, you had a
I would just circle back to say I support not requiring it, mainly because I know the cost of a load of rock for a rural community member, that sometimes when you're first developing something, yes, it's wonderful to have everything pristine at the startup, but sometimes folks need to work their way to that point. And so having a requirement at the front end is probably more detrimental and preventative for us in development than, because I know how much it costs to build a road and how much it costs to lay a driveway, and it's not cheap, and it's a lot of work. And most rural communities, I can look at my house in particular, we have abundant parking just in our gravel. So, but yeah, I appreciate staff's forethought of trying to have the fewest barriers in front of development.
And I would agree. I think that we can reduce those burdens, and certainly parking, I've always thought, is always, the requirement has always been exorbitant, I think, for most of those developments. So I think you're definitely heading the right direction. Thank you so much for the presentation and your work on it. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your time.